Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Claire and I have been together for 5 years. We met in college when we were 18 years old, and after a whirlwind romance, we got married a year later. 6 months after the wedding, our first child was born. Our compatibility was excellent. The relationship became stronger and stronger, but after 4 years of living together, it began to weaken. We were becoming more friends than lovers. There was no thought of us running away because we had a cute little boy, so we decided to try to find a spark again that could ignite our love. We were only 23, and I was sure we could handle it. I came up with the idea to go on vacation to see if it would bring us closer together again. Claire's mom, knowing about our problems, volunteered to take our son for a week, which was even better. And so we flew to sunny Spain to spend our first vacation of our own in 4 years. We stayed in the southern region of Spain, on the Costa del Sol, a Spanish resort on the Mediterranean, and it was incredibly hot there. Our hotel was very nice, comfortable if not luxurious, with a large swimming pool that was viewed from our balcony in the room on the second floor. We both had in mind to enjoy our holidays, so we promised each other to be relaxed, visited bars, and got drunk. Returning back to the room just before dawn, we felt like young teenagers again, tearing each other's clothes. Then we spent the whole morning sleeping by the pool, recovering from a hangover. In the afternoon, Claire went for a dip in the pool, and I couldn't help but admire my gorgeous wife as she climbed out of the pool and walked to her sunbed. Claire is short, about 5 feet and 3 inches, 160 centimeters. She is slender and correspondingly petite. She was blonde and looked great with wet hair that reached to her shoulders, but was braided. Her body looked great, despite the fact that she was wearing a conservative black swimsuit. I even noticed how several guys sitting by the pool appreciated her with approving glances, and I told Claire about it. In response, she waved me off and called me a fool. But I think it still had an effect on her, because when the sun began to set and we moved into the room, she asked if men really looked at her. I replied that yes, it was. The statement seemed to turn her on, and we made love again, on the bed in the room. We didn't even close the curtains, not completely, not even a little bit, but I didn't care. I think she did too. I was extremely happy. That night we went out for a drink again, and Claire was still in an excited mood, so she dressed more provocatively than usual. She usually wore a skirt or knee-length shorts, but here she put on the shortest skirt, one of those that she had brought on vacation. I didn't think she would wear it. She didn't wear such things after giving birth, but either the sun, or alcohol, or the looks from the guys by the pool clearly affected her. By adding a high-cut top to her outfit, which she wore that evening, Claire received quite a lot of male attention during the evening, especially from the bartender and waiters. We went to a nightclub where she was taken away from me to the dance floor by 2 young guys who wanted to dance. It was just an innocent flirtation, and 2 guys bought us drinks before returning it to me again after a few dances. I asked her if she liked it, because she looked a little worried, so she practically took me to our room where we gave out a drunken but still fantastic performance. She said she felt guilty for flirting with them, but I replied that I didn't really attach importance to such flirting. Claire looked at me, thought a little before saying that in that case she could flirt again tomorrow night, if I'm taking it so calmly. Before I could answer, she winked and began to fall asleep, turning away. When we were sunbathing on the beach the next day, kicking the hangover out of us, I asked her what she meant when she said last night that she was ready to flirt with the guys who turned up again. Claire looked back and asked if that made me angry, but I shook my head. I admitted that it wasn't clear to me yet, but for some reason watching her flirting with guys, seeing guys staring at her by the pool turned me on. Really? She asked, and I nodded in the affirmative, ready to admit further that while she was talking about a young man. Claire looked at me incredulously and I shrugged. It was true. I really didn't understand why. I asked her if she liked it and she nodded too. Claire had only slept with one guy before me, her old high school sweetheart. Earlier, right before the wedding, and later, as we began to live together, I often asked her if she was upset by the insufficient number of partners. I wanted to make sure she made the right decision by getting married so young, but she denied any such feelings quite vigorously, saying that she loved me and never wanted anyone else. Immediately I asked her if she felt regret for the lack of experience now, after 5 years, when the passionate blossoming of early love had faded. She rejected having such feelings again, but this time she didn't seem so confident. I pressed and asked Claire again, but received a request in response to stop being stupid. When I married you, we made a vow, and I keep my word, she assured me. I love you. I don't need anyone else. Her beautiful blue eyes looked straight into mine as she said it, but I could see the doubt in them, although I did not attach any importance to this. The thought that she might be playing a little prank behind my back seemed to really turn me on. "I don't think much of it," I said, involuntarily sipping the cocktail I was using as a hangover remedy to ease my still buzzing head. "It's natural if you feel a little desire to experiment. Just be honest with me at the same time, okay?" Claire looked at me, biting her lip, which was always a sign of her indecision or doubt about something. "Well, I enjoyed flirting, and I can flirt a little more if that's okay with you. It's so much fun when you're young and dancing, flirting with guys. I guess I regretted the things I didn't try. A little bit, let's say. It was fun last night, wasn't it?" I nodded as reassuringly as I could. "We'll see what happens tonight." Claire smiled at me and went swimming in the sea to cool off. I didn't really want her to sleep with anyone because it could go very far, although for some strange reason the thought turned me on. However, I decided to try it out and give her the freedom to flirt under my nose like last night. But this time I wanted to see someone look at her like a cat at sour cream. The thought that my habitually innocent and well-mannered wife would flirt a little or be indecently cheeky with someone made me want to take her to a hotel room for another session. But I restrained myself. I wanted to save all this until tonight, to see what kind of flirtation could happen to her. When Claire came back out of the sea, I noticed how many men's eyes were fixed on her. Today she wore a different swimsuit, a silver bikini which had much more openness. She blushed, but she was smiling, enjoying the attention. I suggested that she take off the top of her swimsuit, but she gave me such an unambiguous look and told me to forget about this idea. I was dozing the next time Claire went to sea, and when I woke up and looked for her, I saw that she was talking to a guy much older than her. They were both standing waist-deep in the water, but his hand was on her forearm. He leaned over and said something in her ear. I was far enough away to hear something, but I think it was obscene because Claire put her hand over her mouth in shock, although she laughed. His hand grabbed her and he pulled my wife closer to him, but she pushed him away playfully, not stopping laughing. I watched their conversation in the water, surprised that she would talk and flirt with an older man like this. He looked to be in his late 60s, although there was a little gray in his dark hair. The only explanation for me was that she liked his body. He was very tall, quite muscular and slender. They seemed to chat for quite a long time, but then they began splashing water on each other, and the old man at one point tipped Claire into the water. Both surfaced laughing, and I watched them frolic for a long time. Nothing too bad seemed to be happening, except for the fact that his hand slipped over her from behind several times when he picked up my wife and threw her into the sea. A little later, Claire said goodbye to him and came back to me with a big smile on her face. "I've been talking too much," she exclaimed, and I replied that it was noticeable. I said I watched her while she dried herself and giggled. "He invited me to meet him for a drink in the evening," she explained, "and he showed himself to be a good man." "Why not?" I suggested. "He'll get over it," chuckled Claire. "He's too old for me, even with his muscular body." She playfully threw a towel at me and lay down on her back to sunbathe. "Would you still let me go?" "Well, if he was my type, how would it affect you?" I shrugged my shoulders and said nothing. Again, thinking about the imagination of her flirting, leaving with my permission to have a drink with another guy turned me on, and I still couldn't find an explanation for why. We lay there until the sun began to warm less, and then we went to the hotel and Claire repeated the question, would I let her go with the man she had a meeting with on the beach? "Why not?" I replied. "I'm sure I could entertain myself for one evening." When Claire stared at me in disbelief, I explained further. "You said you missed something by marrying me so early." "I understand, but—" Claire tried to interrupt, but I continued. "You won't let anything bad happen, right? It's just going to be a piece of flirting, nothing more." Claire looked at me but said he really wasn't her type, although she got the address of his residence from him. He gave it to his wife before he broke up. Apparently, he owned a mansion and made visits 3 or 4 times a year. When we arrived at the hotel, she said that she would still go to meet him if I really wanted to. I replied that it didn't matter what I wanted. It mattered if she wanted it. "But what if he starts harassing me and I'm a little drunk?" Claire blushed, and at that time I closed the room doors and turned around, looking at her. "Well, you understand." The serious expression left my face, and I laughed. "And that's your problem, right?" "He can rape me," she said. And I stopped laughing, thinking, I hadn't thought of that. "Look," I told her, "I'll go too and I'll try to be close. If he tries to do something that you don't like, just call me on my cell phone and I'll come to the rescue, okay?" "So you don't want me to do anything?" Claire took off her sarong, which she had put on her way from the beach to the hotel. "It depends on you, my love. What else could I say? Should I have given her the green light to do something forbidden with someone else?" Thoughts fighting with each other swirled in my head, and the sight of Claire pacing around the room half naked made me hard. If it did happen, would you be angry? Because if I get drunk, you know? Claire pulled off her bikini bottoms, kicking them off with her foot. You shouldn't cross the border. Claire opened the door to the balcony to let in some air and came back to me. I think I should try, just to make sure how it will look. Like an adventure? I agree. I had just agreed when I heard a loud whistle outside, although none of us attached much importance to it. You need to find a boyfriend first, I reminded him. Like I said, he gave me the address. Oh my God, Claire screamed, and I even jumped back when she rushed to the balcony door and pulled the curtain. When she did, I noticed a bunch of young guys on the balcony of the hotel opposite ours across a narrow street. They looked at Claire and whistled at her. My wife turned to me with horror on her face. Did they see me? Her face was crimson. Claire closed the curtain, but the door remained open. She was sitting on the bed with her hand over her mouth. I laughed at her. I think they've looked at it enough, I chuckled. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, Claire mumbled when the guys started asking her not to be so bad. Come on, show me more, came the voices again, and Claire got up and went to the curtains. She opened them again for a few seconds, causing a portion of whistles and smiles, and then showing them Fockers with her fingers. Closed the door and closed the curtains. She turned to me. I can't believe a bunch of guys saw me just naked. Later, when we were ready to leave, Claire changed her mind. Or rather, she was afraid to go to Ray, a man in years, in his apartment. She would have liked to, but she had no idea how she would be able to walk up to his door and knock. He said he was here alone and would stay for a week, but she wasn't sure if he was telling the truth. He could have a wife or girlfriend with him, even children. I pointed out that he wouldn't have given the address if that was the case, but Claire had already firmly given up on the idea. And she said that she would have fun flirting the next evening when we went to have fun. We got dressed and went to have fun, while I was already half drunk, having been drunk during the day, trying to get rid of a hangover. We went to visit a different row of bars than last night, aiming to explore them all before we left. Claire looked good. Mindful of her promise to flirt again, she put on denim shorts and a white tank top that seemed to be made of a vest, which revealed a lot in the neckline as she bent forward. She let her curly blonde hair down over her shoulders, and again she won a lot of attention from various men like last night. Every time I pointed out to her that someone was staring at her, she became more and more excited. By the time we walked into the nightclub, we were both pretty tipsy. Claire wouldn't stop talking and couldn't wait to dance. I joined her a few minutes later with 2 glasses of alcohol in my hands, but found her already dancing with some guy. Finding something to lean on nearby, I drank and watched them. Claire noticed me a little later, came over and got her drink. He was really cute, she said, but a little young. Too young, too old. You know how to reject them, right? I laughed, resisting as she pulled me onto the dance floor. Go ahead and flirt, I said and waved her off. She put on an offended face but went and danced on. From where I was based, I watched her dancing with a number of men, but none of them were as cocky as the guys last night. Maybe the men knew about me, I do not know, but no one tried to grope her or anything else. It gave me pleasure to see her dancing and having fun, but I was too tired to join her if I wanted to. The heat and the booze were taking their toll, and my eyelids were getting heavy, when suddenly I noticed who was dancing with Claire. He was tall, broad, shouldered, with gray hair. It was that guy in Years from the Beach, Ray. Claire smiled at me and whispered something with her lips, but I couldn't understand what my wife wanted to say. But when a fast track started playing next, he turned it around, prompting a series of loud laughs from a very happy-looking Claire. I saw his hand move along her side during the dance, which made me sober up. Ray positioned himself behind his wife, and they rocked together as the next song played, his hand making its way higher. Dirty old man. Claire either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. A few minutes later, Claire came over and introduced him to me, explaining to Ray that I was her brother. I looked at her, a little surprised, and that's when it hit me. That's what she was trying to tell me with her lips during the dance. Ray asked if I minded him dancing with my sister, to which I replied that she was all at his disposal, since I was tired myself. He smiled and left to buy us another round of drinks. While he was walking, Claire said she couldn't believe we ran into him at a nightclub. He invited us to go to his mansion after a drink, she said, and leaning forward, bumped into me. I'm sorry, I got a little drunk. You had a lot of fun by the look of it, I said, and when Claire nodded in agreement. Shall we go to his house? He was describing what a gorgeous house he had. Of course, only you want to. Do you understand what he wants? I understand perfectly. Let him try, Claire said happily. But trust me, I won't let him do anything like that. I just want to see how far he goes. I want to see if he'll try it all. It would be fun if he tried to get me into bed. Do you think he'll make up his mind? Absolutely, I assured her. And then we both fell silent because Ray returned with another round of drinks. I let him ask Claire to dance again, and when they had emptied their glasses afterwards, we all went to Ray's house together. It was already a little late, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was so tired, but my wife was turned on by the general attention, so I went with them. She was right. Ray's house was very cool. It wasn't even a house, but a real mansion, more than I could have imagined. There was a jacuzzi in the yard, a barbecue lawn, and it was great inside. There was his own small kitchen, a huge living room equipped with plasma and a high-quality audio system. Ray told us to relax on the sofas, turned on the TV, and poured us a drink. He sat down opposite us on another white leather couch and handed me a large glass of whiskey. I looked at the glass warily, knowing that I probably had too much already, but after I tried it, I decided to drink this too. It was a fine whiskey, and I drank it slowly, sipping. Claire was offered a pretty strong vodka and Coca-Cola mix, which she drank faster than I emptied my glass. Ray talked to Claire quite a lot, leaning towards her, and I watched more TV, only occasionally joining in their conversation when one of them asked me. They were talking about the resort and why Ray decided to buy a private estate here. He turned out to be the owner of a sound studio in England and boasted that some celebrities had recorded there. I wasn't interested in it, but Claire listened, eagerly absorbing all the information. He told me that he has 2 children. Both have grown up now, that he was married, but divorced 5 years ago when he found out that his wife was cheating on him. It struck me that he went through this. I have to admit, Ray had charm. He offered to look through his photo album, and Claire moved from her couch and sat next to him, looking at photos of his ex-wife and children. Claire showed me a photo of his wife, noting at the same time how pretty she was, which I agreed with. She was great. This guy had a lot to brag about, and it was impossible not to admit it. Claire was sitting next to him, and he held the album in front of her. Ray leaned closer and closer, his body pressed against her, and I saw his hand move to her knee and then slide up and stay on her hip. Again, Claire either didn't notice or didn't mind. My eyelids grew heavy, and I leaned my head back on the couch, closing my eyes for a while. It was a little hot, despite the fact that it was early in the morning. I was listening to the TV, letting my eyes rest, and Claire and Ray were talking. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Ray was tugging at my shoulder. "Hey, Claire and I are going to take a dip in the jacuzzi. Would you like to join us?" Ray stood in front of me, wearing only black swimming trunks and shorts. His body was very muscular, even more so than I could discern earlier, and very tanned. Claire was nowhere to be seen. Ray saw that I was looking for her and calmed me down. "She just went to change clothes. My ex sometimes comes to relax, and I told Claire she could use one of her bikinis." My eyes needed time to adapt, but when I was able to distinguish everything was fine, I saw him smiling at me. He was quite a friendly guy, even if he was arrogant. "Come on," he suggested. "You can take some of my swim trunks. They're in the bedroom where Claire is now. Come on, the bath will shake you up a bit." I grabbed the outstretched hand and let him help me to my feet. "Specially for." Agud then proceeded to the plush bedroom he indicated, where a half-naked Claire turned and looked at me as I entered. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked when I looked her up and down appraisingly. "Yeah, just tired, no more. Did the swimsuit fit?" She was wearing white swimming trunks that fit perfectly. "As you can see, no." Claire laughed as she tried in vain to fasten the latch on her back. After all, Claire's body looked so tempting in that little white bikini. I'd be surprised if Ray could resist groping her. He was already barely holding back, so how could he resist seeing her in such a micro bikini? "Ray's going to want to eat you alive when he sees you in this," I whispered in Claire's ear as we walked out onto the patio, where Ray was already waiting for us, chest deep in crystal clear bubbling water. "I hope so," Claire replied calmly and entered the floating pool. "Ooh, that's great," she shouted, sinking up to her chin in the water, then began to sink and rise out of the water, giggling. Ray smiled at her, then at me as I plunged into the tub. It was pleasantly warm, but not hot. The feeling of cold air on my face and the bubbles tickling my feet and lower body were delightfully pleasant, and I noticed that Ray had brought my still half-full glass of whiskey, so I took another sip. Claire seemed to have drunk her portion, because now she took another orange-colored one that stood by the side of the pool, next to Ray's glass of whiskey. It was easy to drink, and I relaxed, but I gathered myself and shook myself again. Claire crept up to me unnoticed and, sipping from a glass, patted me with her free hand at the bottom. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said happily, and I nodded approvingly, noticing how Ray set his drink aside and took a long sip. From their conversation, I learned that he was 54 years old, although he looked younger. He winked at me, crept up behind Claire, and suddenly dived into the water. I managed to take Claire's glass out of her hands when I realized what was going to happen, and a moment later Claire suddenly disappeared with a squeal under the water, because Ray grabbed her ankles and yanked them up. They both surfaced a second later, laughing together, and began splashing water on each other just as they had earlier in the day at sea. "Hey!" she shouted at him. "I had a glass in my hand." "And I saw your brother took it." Ray laughed and splashed it on her again. I concentrated on my drink, savoring the excellent whiskey and enjoying the bubbling warm water as they continued their conversation. Claire was now standing with Ray, leaning on him and swinging in the water. I was right in front of them, and even though both of Ray's arms were stretched out along the edge of the tub, Claire must have noticed it too because she took a small step back and looked at her breasts. "This bikini is a little small." "It's noticeable," Ray sneered and looked at me. I threw my head back and let my eyes rest, but I heard everything. "They almost fell out," Claire said. "I'm ashamed." "Don't be embarrassed," Ray said softly in response, perhaps trying not to wake me up. "You have a really amazing body, even better than my ex, and she was beautiful." Claire was silent when he showered her with compliments, telling how he noticed her on the beach, finding her very impressive. It was obvious that she accepted each of the compliments with joy. A little sweet flattery and persuasion was required to make her feel confident, so I lay back, closed my eyes, and listened. Again, I found that I had dozed off, and when I opened my eyes, they were no longer talking. This time I saw them standing together at the edge of the pool. Ray had his back to me, and all I could see of Claire was her hands on his shoulders. His hands were under the water, but through the water I could see that he was holding her by the waist. It took a second for my eyes to adjust again, and the next I heard the soft sound of kissing. It woke me up abruptly, but I didn't try to stop them. There were no passionate hugs, just a series of soft, wet kisses on the lips, and then Ray's head bent in the direction of Claire's neck. He began to cover the places next to her ear with small kisses, and I saw her face peeking over Ray's shoulder. Her eyes met mine and she froze, but I smiled and mouthed to her, "It's okay," and nodded at her to continue. My wife didn't react. We exchanged glances for a few seconds before she closed her eyes in pleasure, because he showered kisses all over her neck, all the way to her shoulders. But I remembered that Claire introduced herself as my sister. In order not to stay in the pool any longer, I needed to get out, so I finished my drink and barely made it to the side. I covered my groin with an empty glass, and when Ray and Claire looked at me, I said I'd go and get another drink if they didn't mind. He nodded approvingly, but declined when I offered to fill his glass too. Claire refused too and inaudibly asked me with her lips, "Are you okay?" Her arms were still wrapped around his shoulders, and he had his arm around her waist. I smiled at her and nodded, yes, felt myself getting even more heated, then got out of the pool and went into the room to fill a glass. I decided not to come back so soon. Instead, I grabbed a bathrobe from the bedroom and settled down on the couch to watch a little football on TV. I chose an observation point from which I could view the courtyard through the glass door. Although I could only see shoulders and heads, Ray was much taller than my little wife, so I watched him more than her. I saw him lower his head as they kissed again. This time the kiss was much more passionate. I decided to stay in the living room for a while longer to follow the development of events. My groin ached as I continued to observe. I didn't want to watch continuously so that they wouldn't notice, so at times I tried to concentrate on football. I took a look at it every couple of minutes. Due to the limited view, it was hard to see exactly what was going on there. They were still kissing, then both disappeared from view, descending, then reappeared in sight, laughing and kissing again. When I took another look at the pool, they turned around so that Claire's blonde head was turned to the back of my head. I could make out that Ray had said something to his wife, but I couldn't hear what it was. After that, Claire got out of the water and walked into the living room to me. I pretended to be passionate about football. "Hello, are you feeling okay?" She grabbed a towel and sat down on the opposite couch, drying herself. Ray came in with a fresh batch of drinks for both of them. He held one out to Claire. She closed her legs, but it was too late because he said, "Of course you can see." At that he laughed, which made his wife blush. "I'm going to dry out. Do you need a towel?" "Yes, and I need to get dressed too," Claire said as Ray retreated into the bedroom. She got up, came over and sat next to me. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked again, and after receiving my affirmative nod, she moved closer. I guessed that she wanted to tell me something secret because with her eyes, she made sure that Ray came out for sure. When he left, she said, "He really tried to talk me down, but he turned out to be a gentleman." Her speech was slurred because of the alcohol, and I, looking into my wife's eyes, saw that they were burning from alcohol. What did he say?" I instantly forced her to continue, and she took a long sip of her cocktail before answering. He's going home tomorrow, and he keeps saying how beautiful I am. I pressed her to lay out everything. There was clearly something more. He said he wanted to kiss me all over, and, well, he wants to make love to me. She blushed deeply as she finished speaking. Do you want to make love to him? I asked. Claire shook her head, but I could see she was tempted. I put them back in, but they fell out again. And then, I let him kiss them, she confessed. My wife cringed as she told me this, and then her eyes brightened. I nodded and shrugged because I didn't understand why, but it was true. Go on, I pressed her, forced her to continue the story. We kissed. Did he use you? I asked incredulously. I didn't think she could let him go that far. Kissing, well, touching each other. That's what I was hoping for, but nothing more than that. Claire shook her head. No, like I said, he's a gentleman. Ray's voice came from the hallway of the bedroom, informing him that a dry towel was lying on the bed, and he was going to throw the clothes in the laundry. I'm going to dry off and get dressed. Are you coming with me? She asked and stood up. I shook my head and nodded towards the toilet. I need to take a leak. You go get dressed. My wife hesitated, and I guessed that she wanted to say something else, but she turned to go to the bedroom. Do you want me to go with you? Then wait a minute here. I called after her, realizing that Claire might be a little afraid to appear alone in the room where Ray was. No, Claire replied quickly, and she also quickly added, I'll be a good girl. Do you want something to happen with Ray? I said softly, and she turned and looked at me, curling her lip. Claire didn't answer, but she shrugged with a kind of apologetic expression on her face. Then go. I'll give you 10 minutes while I'm in the bathroom. Give me a shout if you need me, okay? Claire nodded slowly, and I went to the bathroom next to the main entrance. I went inside. I only wanted to do it for a small need, but I sat down and waited 10 minutes as promised. I listened to see if my wife was calling me, but it was quiet. After 10 minutes, the same silence remained. I decided to wait another 5 minutes to be sure. My heart was pounding when I finally flushed the toilet and slowly walked back into the living room. I sat down in the empty living room. Claire and Ray were nowhere to be seen in the courtyard, where I took a cursory glance. The jacuzzi was already turned off, and the tables between the sofas were filled with empty glasses. I sat and tried hard to hear any sounds coming from the corridor. Thoughts were bubbling in my head. My pulse was pounding excessively. A minute passed, maybe 2, as I thought I heard something. It was Ray's voice, very muffled, and then a woman's voice. It was Claire's voice, but it wasn't a speech. It was more like a mumble or even a moan. I listened, but the sound did not repeat itself. Then I headed down the hall to the bedroom, stepping as quietly as I could. I walked past the laundry room, which was adjacent to the bedroom and was empty. The bedroom door was empty, but light was coming through the crack in the door. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the narrow crack, hearing Ray's voice again. It sounded like, "Are you sure?" But I'm not sure I understood it exactly. After that, I heard something like a sigh from Claire and decided to take a chance. Even when we were changing, I noticed that the door was unlocked. I pushed it very carefully. It opened at the touch, just a little bit, maybe an inch, no more, but quite enough for me to view the entire room. My eyes almost fell out of my head, and my heart was ready to jump out of my chest from the sight that I saw in front of me. Claire was lying on her back on the bed, topless, in only her swimming trunks. Ray shifted and climbed onto the bed, lying down on the side of my blonde beauty. He was wearing a bathrobe, and it seemed to me that he was not wearing anything under the bathrobe. I looked at my wife's expression and saw delight on it. Ray, in turn, took off the robe completely, lay down closer to her again, approached and began to kiss Claire again. The kiss was much more passionate this time. I saw his wife's hand grab his arm and stop him, but at that time he transferred kisses to her neck. Claire let go of his hand and instead placed hers on the back of Ray's head, encouraging his kisses, which he now showered on his shoulders. Suddenly, I felt something inexplicably aching in my stomach from the fact that this guy was about to use my wife. What do I need to do? Should I stop all this? I continued to struggle with my conscience, even though I knew that if I didn't want this to go any further, I had to act immediately. Claire was powerless in front of his expert handling of her body. Part of me knew I had to stop it. After all, it could ruin our family relations for a long time. I watched as Claire's fingers gripped the bed sheets tightly, so tightly that her knuckles turned white. And it was clear that my wife had not expressed a desire for me to stop this action. After all, she couldn't have forgotten about me, about her husband, so she wanted it herself. If she wanted to stop Ray, she would have done it herself. I remembered her words earlier that evening, "Trust me." So I decided to stay a spectator, watch the rest of what was happening, and continued to have fun. Ray shifted his position again, placing himself in front of her, and now Claire opened her eyes and raised her head, looking at the man looming over her. For a moment it looked like she was going to stop him, but she didn't. Lifting one hand, she placed it on the back of Ray's head and pulled him in for a kiss. A 54-year-old man used my innocent, beautiful 23-year-old wife, and I was the one who allowed this to happen. The feeling of disgust was the only thing that made me think even more. I watched with shame, but also with delight, as Ray lifted himself up on his hands, creating a space between their bodies for a while. After that, he let her flop face down on the bed, breathing heavily, and a moment later Ray himself lay down next to her. He wrapped his arms around Claire's waist, clung to her from behind, and began to coo with her. That's how they came to their senses. I felt a sense of envy that he was so gifted by nature, and how he used it effectively.